Okay. Very good welcome on behalf of AFREC, South Center and Clean Energy Innovation Partnerships. And thank you very much for all of you for joining us in this webinar. With over 600 million people in Africa with no access to electricity, 900 million African don't have access to the clean cooking. Exporting crude oil is main income for the African economy. Just to mention a few, you can imagine how people, energy sectors, and economic activity have been negatively affected by COVID-19 pandemic. It is believed that the global energy demand declined by 3.8% in the first quarter of 2020, with most of the impact felt in the March as confinement measures were enforced in Europe, America, Africa, and elsewhere. Lockdown of the country and shutdown of many businesses across the continent have presented individual, government, and business with untamable debt or even solution to survive. You have noticed how families or businesses no longer can afford or purchase electricity or other energy products for domestic consumption as a result of job losses, restriction, and even rationing of the service in some country. You may also have noticed how some of the country oil supply depleted as a result of the global low demand and the cross-border trading challenge. Despite this challenge, we believe that solution and new way on how to address the issue presented by unprecedented situation call for leaders and policymakers to adjust their work plan, find new solution to the new persisting developmental challenge crippling our system. Our solution should aim at improving the livelihood of our people during the pandemic to nurture the opportunity which are adaptable and sustainable for long term after the pandemic. We know African governments have continued working hard to protect the well-being of the people. We should not therefore forget that energy transition remain even more relevant during this challenging time. Investment in electricity supply is still a huge shortfall in our program, as right now it stands at only 4% of the global investment of these sectors. Therefore, with the huge funding cuts across the industry and several sectors, we should expect even more people, especially on our continent, engaging in unclean cooking, more use of bioenergy resources, more environmental damage, less use of safe energy as the result of affordability and accessibility. Many of us believe that the pandemic removed us from our normal way of doing things. It has presented us with opportunity to analyze our investment, business, and operation mode of our institution. I have honored to host in this webinar a distinguished speakers from different energy sectors to share with us their perspective and insightful opinion to help us to find tenable solution for the development of energy sector in Africa. What we intended to address and understand in this webinar is how the energy sector being affected and how we should respond now and prepare for the future. The outcome of this consultation will be feed our programs and also will be shared with all participants. Before I conclude, I would like also to convey greeting from His Excellency Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, who is not able to join us as the plan in this webinar due to the urgent commitment. I honor to introduce to you our panelists. We will have in this webinar Ms. Sheila Operesha, International Coordinator and Program Manager, Energia, International Network on Gender and Sustainable Energy. Also, we have Mr. Stephen Dahwa, Executive Director, Coordinator Center, South African Power Pool. We have Dr. Nuruddin Yasa, Commissioner for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency of Algeria. We have also Mr. Wali Shambori, Director, Energy, Finance, Solution, Policy and Regulation Power, Energy, Climate, Green Growth Complex, ADB. And also we have Dr. Abdelrazak Ben Youssef, Head of Energy Study Department from OBIC. I am also very pleased to share the moderation of this webinar with Prof. Yuba Sakwana from South Center. And with this remark, I invite Yuba to take lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashid, and thank you for joining us to this webinar. And we expect proactive and then to have limited time and then to go directly to the issues. My first question to the panelists, just to be very short, and it's a matter of warning, and it's only a simple one question. We are still in the pandemic. We are in the middle of it in Africa. We are not yet, it's not yet over. I just want to know, from your perspective, if the COVID have impacted your core business, starting with Wale. Just in briefly, 2 minutes, not more than 2 minutes, you will have a time to talk, and then we want also to have more interaction with the audience.
Right, thank you, Dr. Sakwana. Certainly, COVID has impacted our business. We have all the 54 African countries are member states of the African Development Bank. As a result of COVID, as you know, economies have come under severe pressures and governments are struggling to meet their, budgetary and spending commitments. As a result of that, they have approached us and we have come up with a $10 billion COVID response package in order to be able to meet their needs very quickly. So the economies are under stress, and this is the time for institutions such as the African Development Bank to play a counter-cyclical role to be able to assist these countries out of their current difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you, excellent. Nuruddin, I think your microphone is muted. Nuruddin, your microphone is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Yuba. Thank you, Dr. Rashid, and thanks all the panelists. So I'd like also to thank the AFRIC and the South Center and the Clean Energy Innovation and Partnership for organizing this important Zoom webinar, and also for inviting me to the panel. Yes, of course. We are not. I mean, we are not safe from the impact of the COVID crisis. For instance, for the sector that I'm leading, the renewable energy and the energy efficiency, we have been impacted indeed by the crisis. But with the new technologies, as we are now using the Zoom and we are using also the digital tools, so we were able to sustain some activities through the technology, and we also in the renewable energy sector, we have faced some problems with accelerating some projects, especially because of the measures that have been taken by the government for lockdown and other measures. Maybe we come back later to give more details about the impact of the COVID crisis on, for instance, I will focus on the solar energy sector.
Thank you. Thank you. This is very helpful. And Dr. Ben Youssef?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting OPEC to the workshop today, workshop and webinar. And thank you for Dr. Rashid from Africa, and also Sir Yuba, and also for the South Center for organizing this webinar with also the Clean Energy Innovation Partnership. To be in short, yes, all sector has been severely impacted by the COVID-19. The oil demand decreased by more than 20 to 25 million barrels a day in April. And for this year, we expect a severe decline in oil demand by around 9 million barrels a day. This is the first ever in the history of oil. The same you can see for the prices. The prices decreased by more than 50 and 60%, and sometimes until on Monday, one of the Mondays in April, we had also negative prices. This is also the first time. In short, yes, the oil demand and the oil sector has been severely impacted by the COVID-19. However, the cooperation between member countries, OPEC and OPEC Plus, and also other countries from the G20 and other countries with this COVID, we had created more cooperation between those countries, and now we are now we believe that the crisis is behind us, and we will start a new phase for oil and also for other energies.
Okay, thank you, excellent. But the COVID is not behind us in Africa. We are still in the middle of it.
But for the case for the oil, yes.
Okay. Sheila, welcome. Sheila, I think that your microphone is maybe muted.
Yes, the microphone is muted. We have found that in Africa that COVID-19 has an impact, because unequivocally women are in the front lines of mitigating the crisis against the coronavirus. Whether this is increased susceptibility to respiratory infection because of household air pollution, increased women's time and labor, because the home becomes the center of the work environment, and also the schooling environment as well, or whether it's the loss of income of women in clean energy businesses, either in the formal or the formal sector. So we propose, and I'm looking forward to speaking to that a bit more, we propose 6 main strategies where we do see opportunities to promote greater gender equality and women's involvement in our economic recovery packages. Whether that's promoting clean cooking appliances, promoting social protection packages for women and businesses, more work, gender responsive work policies and practices for energy companies, etc. that I look forward to speaking to.
Please, in the next round, if you can switch off your mic, your video, because the sound is not good. And then Mr. Diwa, just in 2 minutes.
Thank you, Yoba, for this opportunity. And let me start by also thanking the organizers of this webinar for inviting Southern African Power Pool to be part of this important discussion. To answer your question, yes, SAP operates in the electricity sector, and we have been affected quite significantly by COVID-19. We've seen demand for electricity going down during the lockdown period. And then, of course, as the lockdowns were relaxed, we saw load picking up, but not picking up as much as we expected. And this has affected the way utilities operate. It has also affected the way electricity is being traded in the region. Let me for now leave it there.
Okay, thank you. That is excellent. Now we have won. Let us move to the real issue. Let me hand over to Rashid. I think that Abdulrazak is the one who will start. Rashid?
Yes. Thank you very much, Yuba. Yes, Dr. Abdulrazak, really, African continent is known as the only continent in the world that it is net exporter of the crude oil and net importer of the crude oil. In this context, what do you think that what the appropriate policies and measures need to put in place to make Africa self-sufficient, especially to take this opportunity of COVID-19 or the low demand?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Rashid. And also I reiterate of my thanks for you and all organizers for inviting me and OPEC to be a speaker today. Your question regarding the Africa and for the strategies, I think not only Africa has been affected by the COVID-19, but worldwide, in fact, everybody has been affected. If I may mention a few words about our forecast last time about the latest monthly oil market report, I may say that a severe recession in this year with the world economy shrinking by 3.7 worldwide. And period of pandemic, we projected global economy growth of 3% in 2020, following growth of 2.9% in 2019. For Africa, what we expect for Africa in our forecast that the GDP to decline by around 3% in 2020, and major institutions have warned that more than 20 million jobs could be in jeopardy across the continent. Also, the African Development Banks, I refer to one of the biggest banks there, update outlook for this year, and published that last week the decline of 3.4% in the GDP if the pandemic continues into the second half of this year. To sum up, in fact, you have already mentioned that for Africa is a net exporter for oil, but for sure Africa is a net importer for products. I think I'm speaking about the oil, the most important strategy here is to develop more refining sector in different countries. This is one of the strategies. The second one is to enlarge or to strengthen the cooperation between African countries. And this is very important because many producers are there and oil is there, gas is there in Africa. And the more cooperation, strengthened cooperation amongst African countries will help a lot Africa in the future. In our outlook, for example, for Africa, we expect one of the major regions for oil demand consumption growth will be in Africa. And the potential demand in the future, either for oil, gas, and other energy, can come also from Africa. Africa, for the moment, is one of the regions that needs more attention in the future because it requires a lot of investment in infrastructure and so on. And you have already mentioned about the energy access and energy poverty in Africa and to electricity also and cooking fuel. And more than 70% of people, mainly on the sub-Saharan Africa, doesn't have maybe the right for the moment for the electricity access or more for also for energy access. To sum up, cooperation amongst African countries would be the most important maybe strategy in Africa to develop the energy sector within the African continent.
Okay, Thank you very much for this enlightening answer. And actually, they highlight many things. My second question actually to you also, Dr. Ben Youssef. Due to this OPEC Declaration of Cooperation Agreement signed in May 2020, the African crude oil production is expected to be lower. We are expected in our statistic, it is about 10% less than the level of production in the recent years for at least up to 2020. How this affects the future investment for expansion of the existing or new oil field in Africa?
This is very good, important question for investment in oil or energy. What we expect this year and many other agencies that more than 30% of upstream investment for oil and gas will have decline on this on the investment. This is first. The second is if you compare the level of investment for 2020, it's half comparing to 2014. This is a huge decline in investment in oil and gas. And also this is for energy, maybe, and other energy sources. Regarding the decline in the export of the production for Africa, I think this is not related only to Africa, this is worldwide. And with the declaration of cooperation between OPEC and non-OPEC, every country reduced for the 3 months more than 23% of their productions just to balance the market. And now we are entering in the second phase on the declaration of cooperation by reducing the production by 7.7 million barrels a day. And this is a huge amount. And this is combined with other countries like the US and Canada, Norway, and other G20 countries. They reduce also their production for 2020 and mainly in fact for for 2020. For Africa, what they can say in fact for the investment, yes, the investment will be touched worldwide for the oil and gas. The impact will not see the impact in the short term because the infrastructure are there, but when they increase the demand, return back to the normal growth, for sure, if this lack of investment will continue in the future, we will have a shortage of supply. However, I would like to assure you that with the spare capacity of OPEC, we can, in fact, in OPEC and OPEC Plus, can ensure this may be additional capacity. But even with this spare capacity, we need more investment in oil and gas.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to you, Yuba.
Thank you. Nureddin,
Yes.
you already indicated that COVID have impacted your core business, your activities on renewable energy and energy efficiency in Algeria. And I just wanted to know, and then how the COVID have changed your policy focus and then your program and the plan on renewable energy in Algeria. And then to which extent and then to what is expected, what are expected emerging policies due to the COVID outbreak?
Yeah, thank you, Yuba. Let me start by, making some positioning the impact of the COVID on the renewable energy. As you know, during the last years, the renewable energy has been the growth in renewable energy has reached something that 2-digit growth. For instance, in 2019, so we have seen a positive trajectory for the sector. The renewable world looks very different now in 2020. This year, a new solar projects are expected to grow for the first time in many years, caused by the supply chain disruption, lockdown measures, and emerging financing challenges. This is why it is of utmost importance important that the governments, not only in Algeria, but also in Africa, don't disregard renewables and solar power when developing economy stimulus packages. So for now, the effect of the virus seems to be under control in many countries where lockdown measures are lifting and economies are being boosted with significant recovery packages. Others appear to be still very much in the middle of the crisis. So the effect of the pandemic on the installation rights varies in different countries and segments, largely depending on how badly the countries suffered from the COVID-19 and the response of government. So Africa has not been, for instance, affected by COVID-19 as severely as Europe so far, although this might change in the future. Nevertheless, many countries in this region have taken measures with restricted life and works. So there are many indications that the pandemic will have some negative impacts on solar markets growth in many African countries. Smaller IPPs are suffering from severe disruption, being affected differently depending on the project's stage, while a project at pre-closing stage have been affected due to the mobility restriction. Plants and already under construction or operation are suffering with significant drop in electricity demand, something like between 25 and 40%. Some utilities have sent force majeure notice to reduce payment to IPPs, indicating that this market segment is expected to endure negative long-term effects. So we do hope that 2020 will not be a lost year for renewables due to the COVID-19. So to be in the positive side, so Africa has a tremendous solar power potential, which should enable the region to meet its energy needs in sustainable manner. So in order to do so, clean and renewable energy deployment not only need to get back on their recent growth track, but the installation rate must increase much faster in the short and the middle and midterm. So the deployment of centralized solar energy in the region is limited by the absorption capacity of the network. The transmission infrastructure is underdeveloped in many African countries. Improving the operational efficiency of power sectors needs to include reducing technical and non-technical losses, improving revenue collection, limiting overstaffing, and revisiting the tariffs. To reduce line losses, small solar power plants between 5 and 20 megawatts could have a role to play. They can be deployed in different locations across national networks while being closer to the cities, then reducing the distance to be covered in networks and therefore partially limits line losses. So the COVID-19 recovery packages and various economic stimulus programs are a big chance to enable the sustainable energy development to return even stronger. The recovery packages will need to include improvement of grid infrastructure and regulatory frameworks for instance, for feed-in tariffs and net metering scheme, and also for IPPs in many African countries. The post-COVID-19 offers also plenty of opportunity for creation of small and medium enterprises and sustainable jobs. Therefore, the economic stimulus packages will have very important role indirectly to boost national economy, to enable a healthy business environment, but also directly offering financial incentives for renewable investment. For international support for sustainable energy development and energy transition in Africa needs to be accelerated in a very coordinated way through different financing mechanisms and schemes, including financing IPP projects, capacity building, and technology transfer. This can help development of resilience in energy sector whenever second wave of COVID-19 or any other sanitary crisis will affect the African continent. For the Algeria, in our economy renewal program or the development of our economy, energy transition has been one of the three important pillars, along with food security and economy digitalization of the economy. Recently has been the government, we have created a new ministry for energy transition and renewable development in order to boost the development of renewable energy and energy efficiency. So maybe we can develop this later if there is other next question.
Okay, thank you. This is very helpful. And to the participant, please, you can use the Q&A and then to convey your question. Let me hand over to Rashid. Rashid?
Okay, thank you very much, Yuba. Yes, of course, we cannot speak on energy without speak on finance. And my question to Mr. Wali, you know, Africa now is currently have diverted a large part of their financial resources to coping with COVID-19 pandemic. What rapid support that ADB formulated to help regional or the help member states, African member state country, aim to COVID-19 crisis?
Okay, thank you very much again, Rashid. As I said earlier on, the African Development Bank is very experienced in dealing with emergencies. We gained significant amount of experience from dealing with the Ebola crisis. So when the COVID-19 happened, we were very quick to respond. One of the first things that we did in order to shore up our own resources was to launch a $3 billion social bond on the international capital markets, which was very welcomed by international investors, and that social bond was oversubscribed. In addition to that, the bank laid out the framework for its COVID response facility, which is a $10 billion facility to support both public and private sectors in Africa through this crisis. A significant amount of that financing is by way of budget support. And the budget support is to help governments shore up their finances. As we've seen, there are many natural resource-based economies in Africa whose revenues collapsed as soon as the crisis started. And some of them were struggling in providing basic facilities, paying salaries, being able to provide the healthcare infrastructure, to be able to import the medical supplies required to be able to respond to the COVID crisis. So our budget support facility, these are very fast dispersing instruments that allow governments to get the money to be able to respond to social crises, to be able to provide safety nets to populations, particularly vulnerable populations. So you'll find that in some countries, in the electricity sector, the government put a moratorium on the payment of the electricity bills by the most socially vulnerable groups. And, but you know, the utilities still have to function. So if people are not able to pay, governments have to be able to pay the utilities, because some of these utilities have long-term agreements with their IPPs, with their independent power producers. And in some countries, we found that utilities were issuing force majeure notices to be able to say that they won't be able to make their payments to the private sector. It's in our interest to preserve those businesses, because we're also lenders to the private sector. So the emergency financing that we've been able to mobilize has gone some way towards supporting governments in meeting their financial obligations, and also being able to sustain the utilities, because utilities generally have been in a very fragile condition across Africa. And apart from money, we're also engaging in significant amount of policy dialogue to help reform utilities. In countries like Nigeria, where there's a significant liquidity gap within the energy sector, you found that those subsidies that were going into the sector can no longer be afforded. And so you have to take advantage of this crisis to be able to implement some significant reforms to allow the sectors to be sustainable in the long term. On the side of the private sector, you'll find that some of the operators, particularly the new developers of mini grids and distributed energy, this is a new industry that is growing very fast across Africa, where they're finding that because they're providing electricity to sometimes bottom of the pyramid populations, the ability to pay, and you find when you have lockdowns in Africa, there are many people who live day to day. And so literally it means they have no income. And many of those people are not able to even pay for basic services like electricity. So the impact of that has to be mitigated somewhat. So we're looking at ways of supporting those mini grid and off-grid providers to be able to sustain their businesses. And in some cases for the larger facilities, where debt restructuring may be required, we've been approached to look at how we can help them spread out their payments over longer periods. So the package is multifaceted, and we're looking at various ways of mobilizing finances, both from local as well as international investors, to be able to sustain the sectors, because I mean, one of the key areas is electricity, and one of the things we're doing with our SAFER fund is to look at how we can supply emergency power to health centers in remote areas using solar technology. So that is one of the initiatives that we have also introduced. And so, you know, we can expand, but what's happened is that in many of these economies, initially, we saw demand collapse or reduce significantly. But at the same time, the ability to also pay their contractual obligations have reduced. So we're looking to help countries manage through these difficulties. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It is really a very big package for supporting the African country. My next question actually for the future. How can African country further develop their energy system post-COVID-19, considering the impact of the pandemic on their economy now, which is also expecting to extend it, and limited resources, which is already allocated to recovery package. So looking just for the future, how you think that the African country can build their?
Yeah, looking ahead, it's very important to have a diversified energy mix across African countries. You'll find that the landlocked countries, particularly countries that are in the Sahel, without access to the ports, some of these are the poorest countries on the continent, but they have the highest electricity prices because they are relying primarily on heavy fuel oil. So one of the things we've been doing is to encourage more regional trade, to building out the regional power pools. And I'm glad that the gentleman from WAP is here, because that is going to allow countries such as Burkina or Mali to be able to buy electricity from countries such as Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, which is much cheaper than their diesel-fueled electricity. So that regional cooperation is very important, and it's also in line with the Africa Free Trade Agreement, where each country doesn't have to try and develop its energy resources by itself and on its own. It should be able to benefit from regional trade. And we've seen the likes of Ethiopia with the Grand Renaissance Dam will be able to export very cheap electricity to other countries. It's interesting, the bank is involved in the Kenya-Ethiopia interconnection, which allows that to happen. Countries like Mozambique earn significant amounts of money from being able to sell electricity regionally. So we're very keen to encourage those kind of initiatives. It's important that countries focus on the value chain. So it's not just about generation, there's also the transmission and also the distribution, because the distribution is the last mile. And it's important that electricity is treated as a business, not as a social service for politicians. And so it's very important that the utilities are sustainable, they're able to pay their bills. So we have to use, people say never lose advantage. You must always take advantage of a crisis. And it's through crisis that people make the most difficult decisions. So if you want to implement reform, I think the most difficult decisions are what countries should be looking at right now to allow them to be able to sustain their energy sectors, reform the utilities, and implement market-friendly policies. Capital is not fundamental. It will follow the path of least resistance. So countries have to prepare themselves for investment, to be able to attract investments, from other African countries as well as beyond Africa, to allow the sectors to be able to thrive. So we have to look at the COVID crisis as an opportunity to get our acts together to reform the sectors and introduce progressive policies that will allow the sectors to thrive in a sustainable manner.
Okay, thank you very much. Really, it is very insightful answer. Now hand it over to Yuba.
Okay, before going to Sheila, let me go back to Abdulaziz because he's leaving. And Abdulaziz, I just wanted to know what you indicated as the potential for the continent in terms of oil and gas, and how that can be compatible with climate imperative.
This is a very question. If I hear well the question, you mean how can we link the potential of oil and gas to climate?
Yes, you said that you said that you described that there's a huge opportunity perspective for energy access in Africa, looking at oil and gas, and at the same time, there is some commitment on climate and how you make that compatible with climate.
That is a very good question. Maybe just for all participants to know that the climate is in the heart of OPEC, and we have here at the OPEC Secretariat in Vienna a unit on the climate and environment matter, and we are participating in all COP, the COPs, and also the UNFCCC negotiations and so on. This is first. The second, all OPEC countries have signed the Paris Agreement, and also most of them, and the majority has already ratified the Paris Agreement. Now return back to technical level, if I can may say, for the oil and gas, and if I mention mainly the hydrocarbons. And this is also one of for our forecast, we believe that by 2040 or more, oil and gas will stay the most important energy resources. But if we combine this with the environment, the question will be raised. How can we meet, in fact, the commitment for the Paris Agreement and also any other commitment for environment? This is the question is, mainly the solution is in technology. And technology, what I mean by technology here, and many studies and many cooperation are on the CCS, what I mean carbon capture and use. This is the first, and direct capture of CO2. And also the alternative now, how to use hydrogen from oil and gas as a clean energy. In short, to achieve this, the commitment for the Paris Agreement and environment in general, technology is one of the most important solutions, and also efficiency is also the second part of the solution.
Okay, thank you. Now let me go to Sheila. Sheila, I know that in many, there is a big push and then to make the post-COVID compatible with climate. and then to tight post-COVID recovery package with climate change and development. And this one aspect. The second aspect is that, we know that the women in Africa are largely cooking with firewood and charcoal. And this is unacceptable because for many reasons. And at the same time, also, they are washing with hands while we are in the 21st century, doing any kind of drudgeries, in a very difficult manner. And COVID is likely to not improve that situation. And then what do you think there are key strategies in terms of policy research and knowledge and practice in order to tackle this fundamental issue in order to be prepared for the post-COVID package in the African context?
Thank you very much, Professor Sekona. First, let me just apologize that I'm not going to use my video. It seems like when I use my video, I think there's something wrong with the bandwidth, so I'm not heard well, so I just apologize for that. And thank you for this important question and inviting me to participate in this event. I'm going to preface my response to you to say that this is going to be based on research that Energia has done that looked at the intersectionality of gender, energy, and the COVID-19. And based on this, we developed the first briefing paper on the subject. This briefing paper was endorsed by 15 of our partners, organizations from the Global South, and was also used to inform the SDG 7 policy brief of the COVID-19 that was used at the 2020 high-level political forum that reviews the SDGs annually at the UN. Professor Sekona, our findings are very similar to what you have said. And based on this, we have identified 6 areas where COVID-19 makes it even more urgent to adopt gender-aware policies and practices on the continent. First, energy access and end users appliances need to be ensured as part of the rethinking of the care economy and the new importance of home at the center of work, care, and leisure. Already, as you had alluded to, Professor Sekona, before COVID-19, the 2020 UN Women report informs that women on the continent were doing 3 times as much unpaid care and domestic work as men. Now, with COVID-19, we find that this has increased due to school closure and homeschooling. Heightened care needs of sick people, more cooking being done at home, more hygiene and cleaning that is needed. And the low availability, adoption, and use of these welfare and what we refer to as welfare enhancing electrical appliances, especially in poor and rural communities, specifically impacts the time of African women spend in poverty and the drudgery of labor-saving activities and affects their ability to cope with the COVID-19 crisis. Therefore, we are proposing, and we strongly suggest that we urgently require to improve women's access to electricity appliances through mechanisms such as flexible payments, targets and subsidies, and as well, and this might be controversial, but the elimination of utility cutoffs during this period. Second, clean cooking fuels and technologies are also of special importance as household air pollution from traditional biomass cooking, which already causes more than 5,000 premature deaths on the African continent each year, increases susceptibility to respiratory infection and could lead to higher mortality rates of women with COVID-19, infected with COVID-19. What's also more disheartening is that according to the 2019 Africa Energy Outlook published by the International Energy Agency, Sub-Saharan Africa is the only region where the number of those without access to clean cooking continues to rise significantly. This requires urgent action, and we strongly need to invest and to include investments, large-scale investments on clean and affordable cooking energy, comparable to the investments we're making in the electricity sector in our pandemic emergency response plans. Third, we find that women energy entrepreneurs need direct financial support to establish impacted businesses, targeted both at the informal as well as the formal sector. Many women entrepreneurs are household breadwinners. Their income supports essentials like education, health, and housing. They're also critical in last mile distribution of renewable energy technologies due to their unique ability to connect with their customers and last mile communities and to deliver products and services through their social networks. Energea's own rapid assessment done in 2020 of 600 women enterprises that we work with in Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tanzania found that none of the women entrepreneurs were aware of any relief packages for businesses. Special protection packages are therefore required to facilitate more effective remote working capability of women energy businesses, including for e-banking and digital financial services, and also to improve their digital literacy more generally, helping to build their future business successes. Fourthly, as clean energy companies adjust to the new norm with remote working arrangements on the continent, attention to employee safety and welfare and family-friendly policies, they have a prime opportunity to promote gender equality and diversity in the workplace. Women currently make up only a third of sustainable energy labor on the continent, according to IRENA, and less in STEM jobs. The transformation of energy systems brings a vast opportunity to develop local capability and value chains, and clearly requires all available talent. Women's participation would thus be more widely fostered through STEM education and work for training, mentoring and coaching, work-life balances policies, and so on. Indeed, Professor Sakona, there's ample evidence that including women more equally in workforce is good for economic bottom line, for social development, and for the environment. Fifth, the energy sector needs to contribute to mitigating gender-based vulnerabilities that are being made worse in the pandemic and are not always spoken of in the energy sector. For example, gender-based violence has increased exponentially with lockdowns. Empowering women's access to communication tools such as solar radios, mobile phone chargers is essential for women to stay informed about protection messaging and mitigation strategies. Better lighting in homes and public spaces is also an important deterrent to reduce gender-based violence. Powering health clinics is also essential, with only 28% of health facilities in sub-Saharan Africa benefiting from reliable electricity, and women potentially find it very difficult to access reproductive services during the lockdown and the pandemic. The digital divide in communication is also another one to bridge, and electricity can further help to access to electricity can further help to improve this, particularly as we find that participation for both men and women is essential as we're digitalizing the labor market, and also essential for education for girls and boys through distance learning. Sixth, and I'm going to conclude with this, we also find that as we are developing our energy, our post-COVID-19 economic recovery and energy transition strategies, that women should be given a place at the table for decision-making and planning. We have found that gender-blind policies will not deliver on our universal access strategies. And women's experiences and voices are needed. Gender assessments also need to be integrated in our planning. Sex disaggregation data needs to inform our decision makers. So we really need to bring women women to the table and include them when they're doing our economic recovery. Let me conclude by saying that as Africa is reimagining new realities in the context of the pandemic, including visualizing an energy access future, we feel that this is the time and this is the moment that we should not miss, both to give an impetus to a sustainable energy transition, but also to reset a new normal for gender equality and to open opportunities for women and men's empowerment in the sector. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Just one short, brief question related to that. What is the climate compatible alternative of cooking fuel to be deployed as soon as possible massively, if there is any?
So I think, Professor Sakona, from us with Energia, we come from the starting point of what is accessible and what is affordable. And we do recognize that when you're looking at poverty, particularly poverty of the most vulnerable, including women, there are sometimes trade-offs. So in saying that, what we have found from experiences within the continent, but also looking at best practices from outside the continent, and a pointing case being India, for example, is that we do find that LPG is, and scaling up LPG for cooking energy in on the continent is one of the most, is the fastest entry to scaling up clean cooking for women and last mile communities in the region. So I do know that this might be controversial in the when you look at a climate change agenda, but like I said, there are sometimes trade-offs, and here it's really trade-offs where you're trying to leave no one behind. So that would be one. But let's not stop at there. We do recognize that we're looking at transition scenarios. And so we also need to look at more progressive. Electric cooking is becoming, is in my sense, where we've, aside from having the, what we heard early on about the COVID-19, we do find that we are making progress on increasing electricity rates in the on the continent. Supply is not necessarily the issue, it's more the demand. And electric cooking can really go a long way to increase that demand and also be transitional cooking energy. But just if you allow me, Professor Sakona, I think when we're talking about clean cooking, it's not just on the technology side. What we really need to see here is really ambitious, is a step up in political will and political mobilization of our African leaders. And I think the organizing actors around the table, including the African Union, can play a very important role for bringing cooking energy to the highest level of our political continent. I think also scaling up investments is really important. We really need our finance ministers and our development partners, including our including the Africa Development Bank, to really step up, to think out of the box and step up the level of funding for clean cooking so that it's on par with that of electricity. We need to move clean cooking from donor-driven project intervention to really making it a more continent-driven agenda that provides opportunity for local businesses, local employees. And here I think a pointing case is to be learned from the off-grid sector, which still seems to be foreign-driven. But let's make this local entrepreneurship, local employment, including fostering women-led businesses, and include this in our recovery packages. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. And I think that Wole very well and here what you said, the African Development Bank to make electricity accessible to women for cooking. And then he will elaborate on that later on. He will elaborate on that. He's not so walk away. And let me hand over to Rashid.
Yeah, thank you very much, Yuba. I think Dr. Ben Youssef need to say something before I go to Stephen. Abdelrazak? So, okay. Let's go to Stephen Dora. Yeah, of course, electricity, it is a chronic issue in Africa. And I think most of the speaker touch electricity somehow. My question to Stephen, what do you think the most key challenge and opportunity for African utility as well as power pool during this pandemic and the post-COVID-19?
Thank you very much for the question. And as you say, most of the speakers that have spoken before me have already mentioned some aspects of how electricity has been affected by COVID or what their roles are as far as electricity is concerned. When we look at the impact of COVID, what we'll notice is that various countries have taken certain measures to try and reduce the impact of COVID-19, either on the economy or on the health of people. And these measures have taken various forms, and they've also changed with time. The initial measure that was taken by most countries, especially in Southern Africa, was this complete lockdown. And this has taken place between 3 weeks, in some cases, more than even 6 weeks. During that period, what then happened was a lot of the economic sectors were closed down, and only what was defined as essential services were allowed to operate. That therefore meant that there was a significant reduction in electricity consumption, because literally most industry was shut, most commerce was also shut, and the production of electricity had to be reduced to meet the requirements that were then at hand. Part of the challenges from an operational point of view was a lot of generators had to be operated at very low levels. Some had actually to be switched off. And in terms of managing a grid where you have such reductions, it was quite a challenge. With cases where in some countries you had a reduction of even more than 40% of generation going off. This meant that even operation of certain transmission lines, care needed to be taken because they were now lightly loaded. Challenges that were not there before, like how to manage voltage support on transmission lines, began to appear, and utilities had to stretch any voltage support resources that they have in order to deal with this. When you also look at other countries, you might see also something from a positive point of view, because when this happened, some of the countries in the region were actually curtailing load, mainly in the northern part, because there had been low levels of water supply, specifically on the Zambezi River. It meant that the countries that had hydro depending on water supply from that river then were affected, and they were load shedding. But when low levels of load occurred in other countries, they now had opportunities to be able to purchase electricity. And you could see that this became a benefit to some of the customers supplied from the various countries. Once again, during that same period where we had almost complete lockdown, it became a challenge for utilities, for example, to go and read their meters. It then became a benefit for those utilities that have moved to prepayment meters and a lot of digitalization of how electricity consumption was being measured. But for those who are still relying on going out to the customer premises and taking meter readings, it became quite a challenge. As already mentioned earlier by one of the speakers, because a lot of the customers were no longer working, especially those in the informal sector, as well as those that were employed by small to medium enterprises, their ability to pay for electricity also is being affected. That meant that revenue collection for utilities was reduced, yet they still had obligations to meet in order to make sure that the plant and the infrastructure is operating fairly well. At the same time, because part of the measures that governments took were also to try and cushion the low-income groups, to provide some kind of social support to other low-income groups of people. Governments, in some cases, wanted utilities to reduce tariffs. In some cases, some utilities were even asked to provide a window where they would supply electricity for free to certain categories of customers, with promise, of course, that they would get reimbursement of such payments. But we know even if those reimbursements came, they would come after a longer period of time. That actually worsened the financial position of utilities in order to manage the business. Now, after the total lockdown, we then realized that countries started relaxing the conditions. You know, some industries opening up, commerce opening up, and so on. So there was some recovery of load. But our observation is there was never full recovery. We noticed that the recovery of the load was to a level that is lower than the period before the pandemic. It still meant we were sitting with some excess generation. We were sitting with still challenges of dealing with excess generation in other countries. Now, there is obviously an opportunity that comes with excess generation, provided there's an opportunity for you to be able to export electricity. And as you are aware, the Southern African Power Pool operates within the 12 mainland member states of SADC. 9 of them are interconnected to the subgrid, and 3 of them are not. But I'm glad to say there are efforts that are being made for the 3 of them to get connected, and we do hope very soon we'll see Malawi interconnected, we'll see Tanzania interconnected, because for those 2, there are projects that are going on to interconnect them. And there are a lot of efforts going on to also get Angola interconnected as well. But going back to the opportunity that I was talking about is obviously then for those countries that had excess electricity, there is an opportunity of them selling that excess electricity to those countries that are in deficit. And in the region, we have that diversification, like I've mentioned earlier on, that there were countries that had deficit, and yet there are countries that had surplus. That creates an opportunity for trading. It, however, brought to the surface the fact that we actually have some limitations as far as transmission is concerned, which means you could still have opportunities of trading more electricity, but you then realize that there are some limitations in your transmission facilities. It calls upon us as we move over to the post-COVID scenario to look seriously at availability of transmission to allow more electricity trading to take place. In the Southern African region, we have been aware of some of these limitations. We are currently working on an exercise to try and look at the establishment of a facility that could actually finance transmission from a regional point of view. In other words, it doesn't focus just from country requirements. It looks at it from a regional perspective. And we think if that is done, then it creates opportunity for trading any excess power that is in the region. What we also know is that a lot of countries have been making efforts to increase the availability of renewable energy connected to the grid. Some of that renewable energy we know is variable. There are challenges in terms of its impact on the grid. But obviously with greater connectivity, you then manage some of that variability. And we then again once see the opportunity of electricity trade in actually stabilizing the grid, where we can increase cleaner renewable energy in other countries. So these are opportunities that we see, and we are saying in order to ensure that these opportunities are utilized better, we need to look at how to increase the portfolios that are available in trading electricity. We also need to look at how do we better allocate available transmission to improve access of transmission assets to those that would want to trade within the market. So I think if I can stop there, I've covered quite a number of issues that have created challenges as well as opportunities as far as COVID is related.
Okay, thank you very much for this very detailed description of the situation. And I heard you, you mentioned that you need to build more transmission line to get this opportunity. And I think this is the normal power pool model to invest or to promote, invest in the regional project interconnection. There are some expectation that post-COVID-19, more investment will going to the renewable energy and also decentralized system. So how you see power pool business model cope with this expected change?
Thank you very much for that question. So we need to look at this from two aspects. There is going to be more renewable energy connected to the grid. There's also going to be renewable energy which is not going to be connected to the grid, whether it's mini grid or off grid. So let's look at those two aspects. For any renewable energy that's going to be connected to the grid, it's very important for power pools to look at what impact those renewable energy projects will have on the grid. In Southern Africa, we're currently carrying out a study to assess the impact of renewable energy on the interconnected grid. Some of the things we are looking at are what is the acceptable level of penetration of any of these variable renewable energy like wind and solar. We want to be able to assess that from an operational point of view. We want to be able to assess that from how it is spread within the interconnected grid itself, because we believe it's important that we make that assessment and we allow as much as renewable energy to be allowed to be connected to the grid, but ensuring that it actually doesn't jeopardize the integrity of the grid. We then are aware that there are a lot of processes being done to have distributed generation. In other words, this is generation that is connected on the distribution network. Because it's still connected to the power systems, though at distribution level, there are other challenges that it creates in as much as how you operate the distribution network in terms of the capacity of the distribution network to be able to move that power that is being generated at the low voltage end. And once again, it requires us to look at how do you assess the ability of the network to be able to absorb any distributed generation that comes in, and how do you prepare your distribution network to be able to do that. It calls upon us to look at the impact of smart grids in order to allow a better assessment and in order to be able to allow more generation to be connected at the distribution end. When you then look at off-grid solutions, we do believe that they have a role to play, because there are some areas where it will take a long time for the grid to get there. And we think there's an opportunity that those areas still need to get supply. So for us, we don't see it as a competition to try and get off-grid solution, to try and get mini grids, but we do think that the opportunities that need to be exploited to provide such solutions, while grid-connected solutions look at those that are close to the grid, and also look at more of the energy-intensive users that require power that is more driven from large generation plants connected together. This is the way we see it, and we think we have to remodel the way we operate the power pool in order to look at all those developments.
Okay, thank you very much. This is very detailed answer. Now I over to Yuba.
Okay, thank you. I think that we had a lot of questions from the audience, and it will be very difficult and then to go through all of them. And I tried to regroup some of the questions and to all the panelists, and then anyone can pick it. One is to have an African energy narrative, and then that will be part of the post-COVID package for Africa. The narrative is for Africa, by Africa. And then what you think about energy for development in Africa compatible with climate. In addition to that, let us take the challenge that Sheila indicated, the cooking, electricity cooking for women in Africa in a near term. Is it policy compatible? And I think that if Nureddin can ask the question of policy, is it practical possible? And this is a utility, and then that is the power pool if they can do it. And then is it economical feasible? And that is the African Development Bank, and then how to make, I know that the bank is keen to support anything that related to women, and then to make that, and then to Sheila, and is it how the women can be part of the design and implementation of such kind of policy, practice, and finance? Who want to take first?
I don't mind going first.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. So in relation to climate, it's just worth mentioning the fact that you know, post COP23, the African Development Bank established the NDC Hub, which is the nationally determined contributions that the countries have signed up to see them on their path to, you know, sustainability. And it's recognized that you know, Africa's emissions represent you know, less than 3% of the total emissions in the world. If Africa switched off all of its power plants today, the world would not notice. So it's recognized that we're going to have a transition to renewable energy, and along that transition will include things like gas, where Africa has significant resources, more than a third of the new gas reserves being discovered today are from African countries. And Africa needs to be able to industrialize and also to be able to address this issue of clean cooking, to be able to take advantage of its gas resources and LPG resources, and find a model that allows those to be distributed. So the trend towards renewable is there, but we're going to find our own path towards it. And what we've been doing is to help our climate negotiators, to support them in going to the COP negotiations so that they can represent Africa and put Africa's case during these negotiations. So we're actively supporting the building of the human capacity that allows us to be able to put Africa's case forward. Secondly, we are also helping those countries translate their commitments under the NDC to actual projects. So that means facilitating renewable projects, looking at ways in which we can encourage clean cooking. And the issue with the clean cooking is finding the economic model that's going to allow it. Because first of all, you need to have cylinders. You need to put the LPG in cylinders. So what's the economic model? Are those cylinders going to be imported? And if they're imported, you'll have currency mismatches, which makes them unaffordable, and then people stop buying the cylinders. If you manufacture them locally, a lot of people don't return the cylinders. So how do you make sure that these companies that manufacture the cylinders can actually do so profitably? So this is where we're working with government to come up with a business model that will be economic. And we're doing the same with energy efficiency, where we're establishing ESCOs, which are energy efficiency companies that work with government to realize energy efficiency savings. Because although we talk a lot about generation, at times you can actually save more from energy efficient practices than building a new plant. So these are all things that the banks are doing in order to be able to promote the agenda. And of course, on gender, we have a huge program called APOWER, which is to support funding for women entrepreneurs to get into, SME businesses and to run businesses within the energy sectors and other sectors. So, perhaps I should stop here.
Nuruddin?
Yeah, thank you, Yuba. Maybe I will focus on the regional collaboration and the share of experiences. In Africa, so we have good experiences in deploying the solar, for instance, solar energy, or in some parts wind energy, in some areas also geothermal or hydroelectricity. But at some stage we need to share and to share our experience within the African continent. For instance, even in the solar energy, you know that we have two major technologies. There's a photovoltaic and a thermal CSP technology. And as the market is developing, so we see that the price for photovoltaic is dropping significantly. And the last year we crossed the border of 2 centimes US dollar for kilowatt hours for photovoltaic. And in some country they have also a potential for a potential for natural gas. And for natural gas, they can be used for electricity, and also for heating, but also for the transport sectors. I just give you an example for Algeria. So we during the last few years, the Algerian government decided to increase the price of the gasoline and diesel, and they put incentives to use what we call liquefied petroleum gas, GPL. And we saw that the number of cars has increased dramatically, and we are reaching now more than 500,000 cars converted to this liquefied petroleum gas. And this saved a lot of fuels, fossil fuels, gasoline and diesel. And we saw also that in the agriculture sector, the farmers are now using the solar energy for solar pumping, for water pumping, instead of using diesel. And also in the south, because of the rural and remote areas, we are now substituting the diesel power plants by solar energy, because the diesel now is the price of diesel is increasing. So such experience in different areas we can share, and we can also develop African skills. So we can also develop. We have some manufacturers, we have some industry are developing in the country. In the country, we can develop, and we can also develop our exchange within the African. We can also develop regional research and development a project to tackle some solution for cooking, or there is some other solution for cooking. And also we have now in reflection in Algeria to avoid double investment, because we have gas and we are using pipe gasoduct. So we have a pipe for gas to feed the population with gas for cooking and for heating, and we have also a grid connection for electricity. So we have double investment. We invest in the gas to supply people with for heating and for cooking, and in the meantime they have electricity. So we have a new reflection that we single out the supply, but using electrification to faster to wider the use of electricity in for also the cooking and heating. So what I want to say is that we have many successful story in Africa for solar energy, for hydroelectricity, for geothermal, and some for wind energy, and also in some parts for CSP. So we have some challenges and for CSP in some regions. So if we foster this regional and African collaboration, we can avoid many challenges, and we can avoid also some mistakes. Because some mistakes in the strategic choice for either technology. So this is why I encourage that within under the AFREC or other under the other African institutions, we need to develop our own collaboration program, either in the research and development, or either in the industry, or in the other frameworks. So we need to develop African framework, and there is a disparity and there is difference between the Africans. Some African, they have a high level of electricity connection. Like Algeria, we have 90% of electricity generated by natural gas. But now we are developing also by using natural gas, we are using also combined cycle. And in combined cycle, we reduce we save the consumption of gas, but also we reduce significantly the emission of carbon. We have also developed photovoltaic plants, so 20 photovoltaic power plants in the south of Algeria, in the Sahara Desert, and we have experienced many challenges when it comes to the extreme temperatures. So we have problems with the PV panels, and we have also with the dust storms. That when we have dust storms, we have also a problem for the operating of these PV panels. And we have also implemented in the very south of Algeria, in the middle of the desert, 10 megawatt of wind energy. And I can assure you that once temperatures goes above 40 degrees, we experience many problems with operating the wind turbine. So there is a really experience in the middle, experience in the ground, that other countries can avoid and can learn from this experience. And we have also deployed a large scale multi-technology power plant with different technology, multi-crystalline, monocrystalline, and different technology in the middle of the desert. And we have very insightful information about the behavior of the technology regarding the high extreme temperature, or with regards to the deaths and the impact of extreme environmental conditions. So what I want to say that we have opportunities within our continent to maybe to build on the experience of each country, so that we can develop our programs for different uses of different programs, either for electricity generation, or for heating, and even for cooling, because maybe in our North Africa now we are approaching, we are in the summer month, and the big challenge for us is how to respond to the peak demand in the summer. And all the investment in in electricity generation are directed to respond to few months of the year in the summer. So and this there is a technical solution to tackle or to respond to the peak consumption by using the decentralized solution, or by encouraging the rooftop solar solutions, because we are experiencing the shift in the peak demand from the winter to the summer, and from the afternoon, the evening hours to the afternoon hours. Now the peak demand in Algeria is from 2 p.m. to the 4 p.m. and this is coinciding with high solar radiation potential. Maybe I will stop here.
Okay, I think that we have a problem of timing, and let me give to Stefan briefly, and then the end note to the lady, to Sheila. Stefan?
Thank you, Yoba. I think when you look at the solution that can be provided by utilities when it comes to this, is obviously for those that are close to the grid. Like I said earlier on, then utilities can assist in getting them connected. But what tends to happen in countries is that they set up what are called electrification agencies. These are then agencies whose focus is to ensure that energy is supplied to more remote areas. In that particular situation, the role of utilities then will be to ensure that the required backbone network that will be able to move power to those areas that they want it moved to will then be available. We know as well there's the whole issue about affordability of electricity. And it's clear that through policy measures from governments or from regulators, a lot of utilities create safety nets as far as tariffs are concerned, where you actually have lower tariffs for the lower units, maybe the first 50 or 100 units, you then provide a cost subsidy within the sector itself. And I think then that can allow the poorer people then to access electricity even for the basic requirements, but without paying very high tariffs. Let me just then add a comment that has nothing to do with what power pools do, but just to say when Sheila was talking about some of the solutions to provide clean cooking, I believe there could also be value in exploring opportunities of looking at biogas generated from biodigesters as something that could actually be applied in rural communities. In the same way, there should also be value in looking at the utilization of solar thermal cookers as opportunities that can be looked at. Thank you.
Sheila?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So just building on what is said, I just want to read a comment that was made by Victor Akem, saying that we really need to look at integrated, holistic approach to integrated solutions to clean cooking, given that are contextualized different market segments and consumers' ability and willingness to pay. And I think that reflects the comments that have been made. But your question to me, Yuba, very quickly was, how do we engage women in the COVID-19 recovery agenda? And I would say one, I would fully agree with you, is about changing the narrative. I think here, when we're changing the narratives, it doesn't have to be just one narrative for the continent that can be different, but the narrative really needs to be one where we recognize women as part of the solution, part of the recovery, and part of the energy transition with the continent. That's one. I think the next is that if you want to engage, you also have to come to where people are, to where women are. So bringing the conversation to the spaces and the institutions that women occupy on the continent, the line ministries, the gender ministries, the women-led organizations. That's, I think, the next one. There is the issue about capacity building. Here, I think it goes beyond just trainings. It really goes to education, but also building employable skills and expertise of women so that they can compete effectively in the sector. I very much like the point that was made by a colleague on African development, who talked about the action for women in Africa. Which is really looking at leveraging billions of funding to invest in women's economic development in the sector. And lastly, let me say we need to have the right policies in place. Policies that set targets, ambitious targets for women's engagement in the sector. And we need to hold ourselves accountable and monitor for these as we're moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That is really interesting and helpful. Before handing over to Dimitri and Rashid for the closing, let me thank all the participants for this webinar. And then this is just the beginning. There is a follow-up, and then we will explore in detail some of the questions that have been raised on the 22nd. I hope that you will attend that webinar as well. I want to thank also colleagues who behind the scene have worked hard, very hardly, and then to make that happen. My colleague here at South Center, Raj, at also the Clean Energy Innovation Partnership with Vice and Dimitri, and Africa Secretariat with Rashid and sorry, and Dafala for the support provided. Let me hand over to Dimitri and then to Rashid for the closing. Dimitri?
Dear participants, dear speakers, thank you very much. It was very insightful conversation, and I think it will serve really good base for our next discussion and for practical recommendations. Many notes made, and I think some projects we can start from here, like especially for natural gas, for biogas solutions, decentralized cogeneration. I think lots of issues and lots of ideas. So thank you for being with us, and we are waiting for your participation on 22nd of July. Thank you very much.
Rashid?
Yes, I would like to thank all the participants in this webinar, and also I would like sincerely thank our speaker. In fact, the time is limited. They give us very insightful overview and opinion. They give us also very good idea. Collaboration, as mentioned several times, it is very important. Capacity building is very important. And also the issue of subsector, natural gas, clean cooking, and others, electricity. Those all highlighted here, and it is a big challenge. And from Africa side, we are committed ourselves to push this idea and to push the work on that area. And of course, we are looking for your support, for your continuous to go with us hand in hand in the future. We have ambitions, big ambitions to contribute positively in energy sector in Africa, and we cannot do this without you all. So we need all of you on board with us as Africa and South Center. And of course, this beginning, we have another webinar following this on 22nd. And also we have another plan to have a series of webinar to enrich the discussion, to enrich the knowledge, what we need in the future and how we plan. Because as the African saying, if you need to go fast, go alone. And if you need to go far, go together. And here in Africa, we prefer to go together. And thank you very much. And we're looking forward to see you in our next webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and see you all on the 22nd, and then we explore all the questions in detail. Thank you.
Okay.